Tonight begins with a strange invitation, not to a feast or a festival, but to survival. You're not the hero of an epic, not a knight or a queen. You're just you dropped into the most ordinary, uncomfortable, and unglamorous reality of the year 1327. There's no warm-up, no time to prepare, no character customization. One moment you're in bed scrolling, maybe sipping chamomile tea. The next, boom, you're lying on something scratchy and suspiciously damp. Welcome to medieval Europe. No subtitles, no safe zones, no customer support. You might have grown up with the idea that history is about empires and monarchs, grand speeches and great battles. But what if we looked elsewhere, down to the dirt floors, the smoky huts, the aching bones of everyday people who lived through days so brutal, you likely wouldn't last one. This isn't about being weak. It's about the relentlessness of their world. And now, for the next 24 hours, it's yours. So take a deep breath if you dare. Adjust your expectations. And let's walk a mile in shoes you probably wouldn't want to borrow. This isn't fiction. This is survival. And your alarm clock. It's already ringing. The first thing you feel is the weight. Not emotional or metaphorical, though that will come, but the actual physical weight of the blanket crushing your chest. It's wool, unwashed, possibly shared with a small herd of lice. The wool has soaked in months of sweat smoke and whatever else passed for hygiene in your home. You'd like to throw it off, but it clings like guilt. Beneath you is straw that once cushioned livestock. That was 3 seasons ago. Now it mostly hosts fleas and the lingering scent of ammonia. Your neck itches. Your ankle twitches. Something might be moving down there. You don't want to know. You sit up. Your back cracks. You're in a single-room hut, the kind historians politely describe as cozy. There are no windows, just slats that leak cold wind and occasional insects. Your siblings are curled on the ground nearby, limbs tangled with chickens, a dog, and possibly your cousin. Family size wasn't negotiable. You were born into a crowd. And privacy as a concept doesn't exist here. You've already been breathing in the same air as everyone else's farts, snores, and foot rot. It's a scent you'll get used to or not. What time is it? The sun hasn't risen. But that's not your concern. Time isn't something you control. The village bell mounted outside the church will signal your next move. Until then, you obey your body's alarm. Your back hurts. Your nose is cold and your stomach growls with a hunger that doesn't ask politely. But you don't get up fast. Because the first 5 minutes of any medieval morning are about cataloging what didn't kill you in your sleep. Still breathing. Good. Not coughing blood. Excellent. Limbs intact. That's a win. Your clothes, if they can be called, that are piled nearby. A linen undertunic stiff with yesterday's sweat and this week's dirt. A woolen overdress or tunic, depending on your gender, that hasn't been washed since the last thaw. A belt maybe if you're lucky, and a pair of shoes made from cracked leather and hope. You step into them reluctantly. They're still wet from yesterday's snowmelt. There is no bathroom mirror, no toothbrush, no toothpaste. But even if there were, your teeth wouldn't thank you. Most people your age, maybe you're 20, maybe younger, already have a few teeth missing. A lifetime of coarse bread and unfiltered grains means your gums are inflamed. Your breath is a medieval weapon, and you avoid smiling unless absolutely necessary. Outside, it's barely dawn. The sky is a bruise-colored smear. You hear pigs snorting in their pens, a cartwheel creaking in the distance, and someone retching into the snow. Could be flu. Could be food poisoning. Could be nothing. Either way, no one's rushing to help. You're alive, and that's all that matters for now. As you shuffle outside, you pass by your neighbor's hut. She's a widow who sleeps next to her goat for warmth. Some mornings she forgets which one of them has lice. A few doors down, a family of 9 just buried their youngest after a fever. He was 4. No ceremony. Just a hole in the frost. And a whispered prayer. Life doesn't pause. It moves on, dragging the living with it. Mainstream historical records confirm that most peasants in 14th century England lived in one-room wooden homes, often shared with animals due to both poverty and the warmth livestock could offer. Straw mattresses were common, but the straw was rarely changed and attracted vermin. Sanitation was minimal to non-existent. Baths were rare not only because of superstition, but due to the effort it took to heat water, especially during long winters when firewood was precious. You might be wondering about morning routines. Spoiler alert, there aren't any. There's no me time, no skincare regimen, no coffee brewing quietly while you stretch into a yoga pose. What you do get is cold water from a barrel outside, possibly frozen over, definitely full of mosquito larvae in warmer months. That's for washing your face if you dare. But even that's optional. Water is precious. Clean water even more so. Your mother or someone who might be your mother. It's hard to tell under the layers of shawls calls out to get moving. There's no time to linger. Work starts as soon as the sky gives enough light to see your own hands. If you're lucky, today is just field labor. If you're not, it's thatching, repairing fences, or hauling manure. No one cares if you're tired. Everyone is tired. And if you complain, there's a whole generation above you who survived worse. The phrase back in my day wasn't nostalgic. It was literal survival. The ground crunches underfoot as you walk toward the barn, or what passes for a barn: 4 walls, 1 barely attached door, and a roof that leaks when it doesn't snow. Inside are tools or sticks that pretend to be tools. You're told to grab something and get to work. You ask what exactly you're doing today. No one answers. You're old enough to know the pattern. It's winter. The earth is frozen. So today's job is just staying warm while pretending to be useful. That strange cold ache in your chest. Not worry. It's just what happens when your body realizes it's burning more calories than it's consuming. The average medieval peasant consumed 2,000 or 3,000 calories a day during harvest season, more if they were doing heavy labor. But winter rations were lower, and the quality was terrible. Breadroot vegetables and pottage were staples. Meat was rare. Your body is slowly breaking itself down to keep going. And then there's the fear. Not the fear of monsters or war, just the small, constant fears. Will the firewood last? Will someone get sick? Will the pigs birth healthy young? Will the snow rot the grain stores? Historians still argue whether peasants in medieval England were content due to simple expectations or merely resigned. What's clear is that mental exhaustion wasn't treated. It was ignored just like every other invisible illness. You cough. It echoes in the stillness. Someone glances at you. No one says anything. Illness means burden, and burdens get buried. Your foot slips slightly on frozen mud. You catch yourself on a splintering post. It leaves a long scratch on your palm. Later, it might get infected. You make a mental note to look for a rag. That is, if you find one not already claimed for something else. The sun is rising now, dim and apologetic. Your breath clouds the air in soft puffs. Your joints hurt. Your skin burns from wind. And this is just the first hour. Only 23 more to go. The cold stings your nose as you make your way to the edge of the yard. Though yard might be a generous word for a patch of frozen mud dung and compacted straw. It's still early, but your body's already stiff from the night's sleep or lack of it. Your stomach growls, but that problem will have to wait. First, you have to answer nature's call. In medieval times, however, nature doesn't wait for comfort, and comfort doesn't exist. There's no door labeled restroom, no toilet paper, no flush, and certainly no heated seat. You're headed to what most villages call the midden, a pit behind the hut where everyone goes to relieve themselves. It smells like a compost heap that's been cursed. You walk past piles of discarded ash animal bones, food scraps, and human waste. The stink makes your eyes water. It's worse in summer when flies swarm, and the air feels thick, but even now in the morning, frost, the smell is enough to ruin your appetite. You squat trembling in the cold, exposed to the wind and the mild horror of being so vulnerable. There's no privacy. If someone walks by, they see you. If someone's already using the same spot, too bad. Medieval Europe isn't about personal space. It's about getting through the day. You try not to breathe too deeply. You also try not to think about the many ways this act could go wrong. Slipping into the muck, getting a rash from the filth, or worse, cutting yourself on something buried in the refuse. Toilet accidents in this world aren't funny. They're potentially fatal. When you're done, there's no sink. There's no soap. You wipe with leaves, hay, or whatever's nearby and vaguely dry. Water is too precious to waste on hand washing. That's why infection runs rampant. You look down at your hands smeared and raw. Somewhere in the back of your modern mind, a little voice screams for antibacterial gel, but it won't come. You settle for wiping your hands on your tunic. It's already filthy, so what's the harm? Historically, sanitation in medieval villages was primitive at best. Most homes had cesspits, or simply dumped waste outside in designated areas. Chamber pots were common indoors, often emptied directly into streets or streams. In cities, gong farmers were hired to clean latrines, but in rural villages, people made do with little more than a trench or an outhouse. The connection between waste and disease wasn't understood in any scientific way. Germ theory wouldn't be developed until centuries later. What people did recognize was smell. If it stank, it was dangerous, though they blamed it on miasma, or bad air rather than the bacteria lurking in the waste itself. Back inside the hut, someone's stoking a weak fire with damp wood. It sputters and coughs more than it burns, and the smoke lingers like an unwanted guest. There's no chimney. The smoke exits through a hole in the roof eventually. In the meantime, it clings to your skin, your hair, and your lungs. Your eyes water again, and not from the cold this time. You can't shake the feeling of being unclean, not just because of the toilet situation, but because of everything. Dirt is embedded in your hands, your clothes, your very sense of self. You smell like old onions and wood ash. Your breath could peel paint, and yet no one else seems to notice. This is simply what life smells like. You glance at the water barrel again. The top layer is frozen. You crack through it with a stick and splash a handful on your face. It's so cold it stuns you for a moment. You're awake now fully, but clean. Not really. You only move the dirt around. And if you drink from this water, you're rolling the dice with dysentery. There's moss growing around the rim of the barrel. A dead fly floats near the surface. You drink anyway. You have no choice. A quirky historical detail in some parts of medieval England urine was actually collected and used in textile work, particularly in the process of fulling wool. Human waste had a secondary purpose cleaning cloth. It was referred to as chamber lye, and it wasn't considered strange. It was practical. The ammonia in stale urine helped cleanse and bleach fabric. So not only was your bathroom shared with neighbors and livestock, it might double as a laundromat too. Back outside, you pass by a cluster of villagers talking quietly. You catch pieces of their conversation. Something about a traveler who died 2 days after arriving. They say it was God's punishment. Others suspect he offended a local spirit. Still others whisper that he simply drank from the stream after someone dumped ashes upstream. You don't say anything. You're too tired, and besides, your throat feels tight. Could be the smoke. Could be something worse. Historians still argue whether peasants in medieval Europe had any sense of hygiene as we understand it. While elite households might bathe occasionally in wooden tubs, peasants rarely had the resources to heat enough water for a full-body wash. Some scholars argue that bathing wasn't entirely absent, but was discouraged during colder months due to the risk of illness. Others believe religious or superstitious reasons played a bigger role. Exposing your body was seen as shameful or dangerous. What's clear is that bathing was rare, especially for the poor, and when it happened, it was more of a rinse than a cleanse. You return to the hut, still damp, still grimy. The fire has finally caught, and someone's heating water in a pot. Not for bathing, don't be ridiculous, but for the morning meal. It's pottage again. Always pottage. But that will come later. For now, you sit near the hearth, rubbing your hands together, trying to will sensation back into your fingertips. There's a moment of stillness, fleeting but real. You look around and see your siblings still half asleep, your father sharpening a tool with a rock, your mother muttering as she untangles a threadbare shawl. There's a kind of quiet dignity in their movements. They're not rushing. They're not complaining. They're enduring. And you're still struggling. You've only been awake for an hour, and already you face filth, exposure, dehydration, and mild trauma. You ache in places you didn't know you had. You're hungry, uncomfortable, and questioning every life choice that brought you here, even though none of them actually did. You didn't choose this. You were placed here, and now you have to keep going. Outside the village, rooster crows late lazy and indifferent. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere a baby cries. The world doesn't care that you just survived a medieval toilet. But you do. And that's worth something. Because this is the rhythm now. You wake, you endure, you wait for the next hard thing, and then you do it. Not because you're strong, but because there's no other option. And that's how people survived here. Not through courage or faith, though, those helped. They survived through routine, through grit, through doing the disgusting thing and then moving on. So you take a deep breath, smoke and all, and get ready for breakfast. Spoiler, it won't be better than the toilet. But it's next. And next is survival. You hear it before you see it. The sound of something thick bubbling slowly in a dented pot over the fire. It gurgles and pops a stew-like hiss, rising with the scent of root vegetables and yesterday's ash. If you were hoping for eggs toast, or anything resembling coffee, you're in for a medieval kind of heartbreak. This is breakfast, and it's about to challenge both your palate and your patience. Pottage. The name alone sounds like a warning. And that's exactly what it is, a grim reminder that food in this world is more about survival than satisfaction. You watch as a ladle scrapes the pot's bottom, lifting a scoop of something grayish-brown, vaguely chunky, and entirely ambiguous. It plops into a wooden bowl with a thud that would make a modern blender cry. You try not to breathe through your nose. The smell is equal parts turnip smoke, and what you desperately hope is cabbage. Pottage is what happens when there's no choice, no fridge, and no flavor profile. It's a slow-cooked stew of whatever you managed to grow, scavenge, or barter in the last week. Barley if you're lucky, stale rye crusts soaked back to life, and some kind of root vegetable that looks like it gave up mid-century. If you're very fortunate, like winning the lottery fortunate, there might be a sliver of bacon fat, or a tiny bone to chew. But today's version has neither. The bowl is passed to you. It's warm, which is its only redeeming feature. You hold it close to your chest and feel the heat seep into your fingers. Then reluctantly you take a bite. It's chewy, not in a good way. The texture is somewhere between porridge and wallpaper paste. You swallow hard. There's a faint taste of dirt, which might actually be dirt. You decide not to ask. Historically, pottage was the foundation of medieval diets, especially for the lower classes. It was flexible, cheap, and easy to stretch across multiple meals. Grains like barley or oats were cooked down with water, or wheat broth often flavored with onions, leeks, and herbs. In lean times, even weeds were added. Food historians note that pottage could vary from nutritious to nearly inedible, depending on the season and one's social standing. The idea of breakfast as a separate structured meal hadn't yet taken hold for most peasants. You simply ate what was available, if anything. You sit near the fire, blowing gently on your spoon. Someone offers you a hunk of black bread to dip stale but still functional. You're grateful. The pottage tastes marginally better with something to chew. The bread, however, is dense enough to be weaponized. As you gnaw through it, a flake of grit gets caught between your molars. You wince. This isn't your first encounter with medieval milling standards. The flour used in your bread was ground with stones which often shed tiny fragments. You're not eating just wheat, you're slowly sanding down your teeth. That's not hyperbole. Archaeological studies of medieval skeletons routinely show severe dental wear, especially among the poor. By age 30, many peasants had lost several teeth due to decay and abrasion. Sugar wasn't widespread yet, but grinding stones, often made of sandstone or granite, left fine particles in the flour. Over time, eating bread was like chewing on sandpaper, and without dental care, even a minor cavity could turn into a life-threatening infection. You chew slowly, deliberately. Each bite is a gamble between hunger and pain. Around you, the family eats without complaint. This is normal. No one's expecting taste. They're expecting calories. Enough to fuel them through the day. Meals are about endurance. Enjoyment is reserved for feast days, rare, precious, and usually religious in nature. Today is not a feast day. The fire crackles, offering the only real comfort in the room. You watch smoke drift upward toward the open thatch above. It stings your eyes, coats your throat, and settles into your clothes like a permanent guest. You glance around at the others. One child is licking their bowl clean. An older man picks at his portion, already thinking of the next chore. No one talks much. Mornings are quiet, functional. Every movement has a purpose. You shift on your stool, just a block of rough wood, splintered and unkind. Your back aches from the night's sleep and from the lack of support now. You imagine a pillow. Then you laugh. What's a pillow in this world? A sack of straw if you're lucky. Feathers were a luxury for the rich. Even cushions were rare in peasant homes and chairs with backs reserved for the manor. As you finish your bowl, you wonder briefly how food was stored. There's no fridge, of course. No tin cans or preservatives. Everything is seasonal, perishable, and prone to rot. Dried beans, salted meat, if you're lucky enough to have it, root vegetables buried in cool pits, these are your staples. Dairy spoils quickly. Eggs are precious and rarely consumed unless a hen lays unexpectedly. Fruit is seasonal and often dried when possible, though mold is always a risk. You remember reading about medieval food in school. Maybe you laughed at the weird recipes or strange ingredients. Now you're living the consequence of scarcity. The truth is, most people ate the same few meals over and over again, not because they lacked imagination, but because they lacked options. Food wasn't a cultural statement. It was a lifeline. A quirky historical detail: peasants sometimes added ale to their pottage or bread, not for flavor, but because water was often unsafe to drink. Ale, even weak ale, was boiled during brewing, making it safer than stagnant water. Children drank it. The elderly drank it. It was normal. So while you clutch your bowl of lukewarm stew, you might also be sipping a thin sour ale, slightly fizzy, slightly bitter, and absolutely necessary. You lean back slightly, your stomach less hollow, but still unsatisfied. This wasn't a meal. It was an intermission between hunger. And soon it'll wear off. The workday hasn't even started yet. You wonder how people kept doing this day after day. But as you look around, you begin to understand they weren't doing it for fun. They were doing it because survival wasn't poetic. It was habitual. Historians still debate the average caloric intake of medieval peasants. Some argue it was surprisingly high, up to 3,000 calories a day during harvest season. Others caution that calories don't tell the full story. Nutritional value was limited. Meals lacked protein, iron, and key vitamins. Malnutrition was common, especially in winter or during crop failure. Children were particularly vulnerable. Growth was stunted. Bones were fragile. And famine wasn't an exception. It was a recurring reality. Someone claps their hands, a signal to start the day's labor. Bowls are stacked scraps tossed into a pail for the pigs. The fire is smothered slightly to conserve fuel. You stand slowly, knees popping, stomach heavy with starch. Breakfast is over. Not that it felt like a beginning. It felt like a delay, a short pause before the world resumed its pressure. You step outside into the pale morning light. The sun has risen fully now, though its warmth is still shy. Your breath fogs the air. A cart creaks past, pulled by a donkey with ribs showing. Two boys chase each other through the mud, laughing until they trip and fall. No one scolds them. Let them laugh while they can. The day will take it from them soon enough. You stretch your arms and feel the tightness in your shoulders. It's going to be a long day. The fields are waiting, the tools are dull, and your next meal is hours away. You adjust your belt, pull your cloak tighter, and begin walking. Your feet are already sore. Breakfast didn't fill you. It reminded you of what you're missing. Comfort, choice, salt. You push the thought aside. You can't afford to dwell on it. You've got work to do. The field doesn't care that your bread tasted like sand and sadness. It only cares if you show up. And you will, because you have no other choice. The ground outside crunches beneath your feet as you head toward the edge of the village. The air is still sharp with frost, but the sun, pale and distant, is climbing. It's not warm, not yet, but the light is enough to start the workday. Not that you have a say. In medieval life, the sun is your timekeeper, your foreman, and your only free lighting source. And today, like every day, it tells you get to the fields. Your feet slide in the half-frozen mud. The thin leather shoes you wear, stitched from animal hide, cracked and fraying, offer little grip, no cushion, and even less protection. After a few steps, water seeps through the seams. You pretend not to notice. What's another layer of discomfort? As you reach the open farmland, you're greeted not by machines, but by silence. A few other villagers are already there, their backs bent, their breaths visible in the cold. There are no engines, no equipment hums, just the scrape of crude wooden tools against frozen soil. Someone hands you a hoe. It's more a stick with a flattened iron edge, battered, rusted, and heavier than it looks. You grip it and nod as if this makes sense, as if your hands aren't still aching from yesterday's work. The field doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care that you're tired or hungry, or that your shoulders burn from lifting the same weight over and over. It doesn't care if your hands crack or your fingernails tear. The field asks only one thing, do it anyway. You start digging. It's not plowing season yet, this is winter maintenance. Breaking up the frost-hardened topsoil clearing stones, pulling old roots. It's tedious, repetitive work, and each movement sends shock waves into your joints. You adjust your grip. A splinter stabs your palm. You curse under your breath silently, of course. There's no time for drama. No one's watching. Or rather, everyone is too busy to care. The man next to you is twice your age, his face weathered like cured leather. He doesn't speak, just work swing scoop, drag breathe. You try to match his rhythm. After 10 minutes, your arms throb. After 20, your lower back starts to scream. You pause just for a second. The silence is broken by a cough behind you. Keep going. That pause was a luxury. Mainstream historical records describe peasant labor as grueling and unending. In feudal England, for instance, serfs and villains owed labor to the lord of the manor, often 2 to 3 days a week on his land, in addition to managing their own subsistence plots. During peak agricultural seasons, those obligations could extend to 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. The tools were rudimentary wooden spades, flails, sickles, and hoes. Work was dictated by the season, and the Lord's needs, not your own health or family life. There is no work-life balance. There is only work. You glance at the edge of the field. There your younger cousin is herding geese. He's maybe 9 years old, dressed in wool, several sizes too large, tied at the waist with twine. His job is to keep the birds from wandering too far. He carries a stick and a pouch of stones. He'll be out here until sundown, just like you. There is no school to attend, no cartoons to watch, no lunch break. His childhood is a job. You continue swinging the hoe. A rock larger than your fist lies embedded in the soil. You jab at it, gritting your teeth. It takes 3 tries before it loosens, popping out with a clump of frozen mud. Your fingers are numb. You flex them slowly, trying to keep blood flowing. You wonder if they'll blister again. The answer is yes. Of course they will. A few feet away, a woman dumps a basket of weeds into a pile. Her apron is stained, her hands red with cold. She pauses to wipe her nose on her sleeve, then keeps going. That's the rhythm of this world. Pause. Endure. Repeat. You learn to ignore pain. You learn to work through it. Or you don't eat. Your stomach growls again. That bowl of pottage from breakfast is long gone. You think about sneaking away just for a minute. But where would you go? There's no warm cafe waiting. No snack drawer. Only more mud. More wind. More work. Still, there's something hypnotic about the labor. You fall into a rhythm swing, dig-pull. It's meditative in a brutal body-breaking kind of way. Your thoughts begin to wander, not to the future you have none here, but to the simple hope that the weather holds and your shoes don't split. A cart rattles down the nearby path, pulled by a bony horse with a swayback and hooves caked in ice. A man stands at the reins wrapped in layers, face hidden by a hood. He nods at you as he passes, then keeps going. His cart is loaded with sax grain, maybe. Maybe not. You'll never know. Life here is full of unfinished stories. A quirky historical tidbit. In medieval England, plowing fields with oxen was a community effort. The heavy wooden plows required not only skill, but teamwork, especially on wet or uneven land. Villages often worked together in rotation, sharing both labor and livestock. This system, called cooperative plowing, meant that even poor families without their own animals could participate. But it also meant that your ability to grow food was tied not just to weather or soil, but to the goodwill of your neighbors. Your arms tremble as you lift another clump of soil. You switch hands trying to ease the pressure, but it only shifts the pain. You check the sun's position. Still too low for lunch. Still too far from rest. You wipe your brow with your sleeve. The sweat freezes almost instantly. You're overheating and freezing at the same time. The wind cuts through your wool layers. Your toes are numb. Your fingers barely respond. And yet you keep going, because there's no other option. Because this is what life demands. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly miserable. Some point to church records and tax documents that describe widespread hunger illness and early death. Others suggest that communal ties, festivals, and religious faith offered psychological resilience. Perhaps misery is too simple a word. Perhaps the better word is burdened, not hopeless, but constantly underweight. You begin to understand what that feels like. Finally, someone calls for a break. You straighten slowly, every vertebra protesting. Your back feels like it's been hammered flat. Your knees pop as you shift weight. You look down at your hands. The skin is raw, the knuckles split. You're bleeding slightly from the edge of your thumb. You press it into your tunic. There's no bandage. You sit on a stone and catch your breath. Around you, others do the same. Some drink from clay cups. Others chew on scraps of bread pulled from satchels. A few just close their eyes. No one talks. Everyone listens to the wind, to the groan of joints, to the silence of hunger. You close your eyes for just a moment, and in that stillness you feel the aching beauty of this brutal life, the cold, the weight, the relentlessness, and somehow the resilience. This is not a romantic past. It's not a storybook. It's dirt and sweat and sacrifice. But it's also real, visceral, and unforgettable, and you're living it one agonizing swing at a time. The break ends. You rise again. The field calls. And you answer. Young. The sky stretches wide above you, pale blue and cloudless, with a brightness that's more illusion than warmth. As noon approaches the cold of morning, gives way to a different kind of discomfort, sunlight without mercy. There's no shade here, not in these open fields. The trees were cut long ago for firewood, or to clear room for barley and rye. What remains is stubble dust, and the heat building on your back like an unspoken threat. You're still swinging the hoe, dragging weeds, prying up roots that refuse to yield. Your hands are blistered now, one on the palm, another, forming across your thumb where it rubs against the splintered handle. Every movement sends small shock waves up your forearms. You pause, shake out your fingers, then go again. You can't afford to stop for long. There's no union, no labor law, no 10-minute break in medieval life. The only reward for hard work is the knowledge that someone else doesn't have to do it for you. By now your body is slick with sweat beneath your wool tunic. The air is thick with the scent of churned earth smoke from nearby fires, and something sour that might be your own exhaustion. You pull your cloak tighter at first out of habit, but soon cast it off entirely. It's heavy and damp and suffocating, and your skin is burning. Literally. You can feel it, raw, exposed, reddening. You wonder about sunblock. Of course there's no such thing, but even the concept seems absurd here. The only protection you have is a straw hat, if you can find one, or a rag draped over your head tied at the neck like a makeshift scarf. It's not about comfort. It's about not passing out. Sunburn is a real threat in this world. Medieval people worked outdoors for most of their lives, and while their skin was more accustomed to it than yours, burns still happened, especially in spring and summer, when the sun was intense and sudden after long gray winters. There are historical records of sunpox and skin fevers, terms likely describing heat rash sunstroke, or infection resulting from sun-damaged skin. You start to feel dizzy, a pulsing behind your eyes. Your legs feel heavy as if stuffed with wet cloth. Your mouth is dry tongue like parchment lips cracked. You try to swallow, but there's barely any saliva. You reach for the leather flask at your hip. It's nearly empty. You tilt it back, lukewarm water dribbles out, tasting faintly of smoke and something metallic. You drink anyway. It's all you have. A woman nearby collapses to one knee. No one panics. Two other workers help her up, hand her a cloth to press to her forehead. She sits against a haystack for a while, staring into nothing. Heat stroke isn't a mystery here. It has no name, no diagnosis. It's just what happens when you're out too long. Most people recover. Some don't. You press your hands to your thighs and breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It helps a little. But the pounding in your skull doesn't fade. You think about sitting down just for a minute, but you're afraid you won't get back up. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that medieval peasants often worked under extreme weather conditions, with little or no reprieve. Summer brought the risk of dehydration, sunstroke, and infected wounds. Winter was a different threat, hypothermia, frostbite, or simply losing fingers to the cold. But the work went on regardless. Livelihoods depended on daily output. Failing to show up for field work could mean lost wages, or worse punishment from a landowner for failing to meet your duty. In some cases, death from exposure or exhaustion wasn't even recorded. It wasn't seen as extraordinary. Just another line in the margin of life. You trudge onward, trying to shift the weight of the hoe to your other shoulder. Blisters pop beneath your grip. The pain is sharp, immediate. You hiss under your breath, then bite your tongue. No one needs to hear you whimper. Your vision blurs. Your legs shake. You blink rapidly and suck in air. Focus on something. Anything. The movement of the weeds. The buzz of a nearby fly. The creaking of the wooden fence posts lining the field. A quirky historical tidbit. In some medieval communities, workers chewed willow bark during the hottest months. It contains salicin, a natural pain reliever, and the chemical precursor to aspirin. The bark helped reduce fever, inflammation, and pain, though few understood why. It was simply known to work passed down through oral tradition. You wonder what it tastes like. You'd chew anything at this point if it meant your head would stop pounding. You look around. No one else is stopping. Their bodies are lean, calloused, adapted. You're the outsider here, even if you've been here for hours. You don't have the years of repetition, the slow building of tolerance. You have your determination, but even that is beginning to fade under the sun's weight. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants worked less than modern people. Some point to records showing holy days and saints' festivals that interrupted the calendar. Others argue that those days were not true days off since feasts required preparation, and Sundays were filled with mandated church attendance. What's more reliable are the seasonal patterns. Harvest months required near constant labor, from sunrise to dusk. And though winter was slower, it wasn't restful. It just hurt differently. Finally, you dropped to your knees. Not out of choice, but necessity. Your legs no longer want to listen. You brace yourself with the handle of your hoe staring at the ground, your breath ragged and hot. You're not crying. Not quite. But you are close. Someone walks by and tosses you a scrap of cloth. Cover your neck, they mutter. You tie it quickly, grateful. Not for the fabric, really, but for the recognition. Someone saw you. A small kindness in a world that rarely gives any. You sit in the dirt for a moment longer. Around you, the field continues. Weeds don't stop growing. Roots don't pull themselves. Life doesn't care how you feel. But the sun seems to pause just for a second, as if offering you a small, silent truce. You accept. Then you stand again. You stand again, though your legs shake as if they belong to someone else. The cloth tied at your neck is damp, already soaked. Not from water, but from the relentless flood of your own sweat. Every step feels heavier than the last your body caught in a slow-burning revolt. But there's no time to collapse. Someone calls you over to help lift a load of firewood, and you obey without thinking, hands trembling as they grip the rough rope handles. The bundle shifts in your arms, too heavy for comfort, but too necessary to refuse. You walk it over to the side of the field, feet slipping slightly on packed earth and straw. When you set it down, the relief is immediate. Then something sharp brushes your forearm. You look down. A sliver of splintered bark has opened a small gash just below your elbow. It's thin, shallow, but it stings more than you expect. You press your hand against it. Warm blood dots your skin. Not much, just enough to remind you of a truth that's hard to swallow out here. A small wound in the modern world is an inconvenience. In the medieval one, it's an invitation. There are no disinfectant wipes, no bandages waiting in your pocket. You glance around uncertain before ripping off a strip of your tunic's already frayed hem and wrapping it around the cut. It sticks awkwardly. The fabric is filthy damp, and probably more dangerous than the wound itself. But it's all you have. And right now, stopping the bleeding takes priority over everything else. In medieval Europe, even a minor cut could spiral into something life-threatening. Germ theory didn't exist, and no one knew what caused infection. Only that sometimes wounds festered, turned black, and led to sudden death. Pus was often considered a good sign, believed to be part of the healing process. A wound that didn't ripen with white or yellow discharge was thought to be bad. This misunderstanding persisted for centuries. You try not to think about it. You press your hand tighter to the wound, standing very still. Pain radiates up your arm. You exhale slowly. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it'll scab and you'll be fine. You repeat the thought again and again like a silent prayer. Maybe, maybe. You walk back toward the center of the field, cradling your arm slightly, and that's when someone gestures for you to follow them. The village healer, they say. You're hesitant, but your blood is still seeping through the cloth. You nod and follow the path toward the far end of the village. The healer's home is smaller than most, but packed. Dried herbs hang from the beams overhead, bundles of rosemary, yarrow, sage, and something acrid you can't identify. The air is heavy with smoke and crushed leaves. A woman older, hunched with eyes like coals, waves you in and gestures at your arm. She says nothing at first, just takes your hand and peers at the cut with pursed lips. Then she turns rummages through jars on a shelf and pulls out a wooden bowl. She grinds something with a pestle dark leaves and what looks like crushed garlic and mixes it with a dab of animal fat. The smell is sharp, earthy. Then she dips a finger into the mixture and applies it directly to your skin. It burns. You flinch. She doesn't stop. She binds it with a strip of linen tighter and cleaner than the rag you used, and then finally meets your eyes. "You'll live," she says, then hands you a small bundle of herbs wrapped in a cloth. For fever, if it comes. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine was a patchwork of folklore herbalism and early theories from classical antiquity. Most rural communities relied on local healers, often women who passed down remedies through oral tradition. Treatments for wounds might include honey, a natural antiseptic vinegar, garlic, or moss. Some were genuinely effective. Others were superstitious, but access to educated physicians was limited to the wealthy, and even they relied on outdated theories like the balance of humors. You thank her quietly and leave. The cut still throbs, but the bleeding has stopped. Your head feels light. Maybe from the heat, maybe from the fear, or maybe from the creeping realization that every day here walks the knife edge between function and failure. As you make your way back, a boy runs past you barefoot and laughing. He's holding a wooden stick like a sword, chasing a goose that honks furiously in protest. For a moment the scene is almost charming, but then he trips on a stone, hits the dirt hard, and howls. You rush over instinctively. He's scraped his knee badly, skin peeled, blood running. He wails. His mother arrives seconds later, scooping him into her arms. She spits on a cloth and presses it to the wound. The boy shrieks louder. Then she carries him off, muttering to herself. You stand there, still holding the little pouch of herbs the healer gave you, and realize this is how it starts. A scrape, a cut, a bit of broken skin. If you're lucky, it scabs. If not, fever infection and no way back. A quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval healers believed placing a live frog against a wound could draw out the illness. Others used charms or amulets, especially for injuries that refused to heal. Wounds that lingered were often thought to be cursed, or the result of moral failing. Healing wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, emotional, and deeply symbolic. Illness could be punishment, recovery a sign of divine favor. As you return to the field, you begin to understand that health is a privilege here, not just because there are no hospitals, but because every illness is a gamble, every treatment a roll of the dice. You remember your modern world Band-Aids, antiseptic walk-in clinics. It feels like science fiction now. Your arm wrapped in linen. Your thoughts tangled with worry. You pick up your hoe again. You dig slowly, cautiously. Each movement reminds you of your fragility. You are soft. You are breakable. And this world, this relentless grinding world, doesn't wait for the weak to recover. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of medieval medicine. Some emphasize the surprisingly advanced practices in monasteries, surgical tools, detailed herbals, patient records. Others highlight the absence of sanitation, the prevalence of bloodletting, and the heavy reliance on astrology. The truth lies somewhere in between a patchwork of wisdom and error of trial and superstition held together by centuries of human effort and desperation. You strike the earth once more, your wounded arm pulsing with each impact. The cut is small, but the memory of the healer's eyes, dark, unreadable, lingers. She didn't promise healing. She promised you'd live. And here that's about as good as it gets. You can't remember the last time you looked forward to a meal. It's late now, the sun is dragging its feet toward the horizon, turning the frost-stiff fields into long streaks of gray and gold. Your arms feel like ropes pulled too tight. Your back that stopped registering pain hours ago. Your stomach, however, is very much awake, making noises that sound suspiciously like protest. The moment someone mutters the word supper, you feel it like a physical release relief. Tempered by the reality that meal is a generous word for what's coming, you trudge back to the village along with the others, moving in a loose, slow procession of worn-out bodies. No one speaks. Everyone is saving what little energy they have left. The cold has returned subtle at first, but biting when you stop moving. It creeps through your sweat-damp clothing and makes you shiver as you push open the crooked wooden door of your home. Inside, the smell hits first. Something thick, sour, and unmistakably alive. It comes from a large pot that's been stewing all day over the fire. Not in a cozy grandma's kitchen sort of way, more in a this-could-go-either-way sense of edible suspense. The smell is smoky with a tang of overcooked greens and boiled bone. You approach cautiously. It's stew, technically, though what exactly went into it is unclear. You spot a carrot, or what was once a carrot, alongside limp cabbage, and something stringy that might have once been chicken, or perhaps a particularly muscular rat. There's no need to confirm. Someone ladles a portion into your bowl. The liquid sloshes oily and thin, pooling around a few chunks of something vaguely meat-like, and a layer of what can only be described as simmer scum. Still, it's hot, and that alone makes it valuable. You settle near the fire hands wrapped around the bowl like it's a sacred relic. You take your first sip. It burns your tongue slightly, but offers a fleeting moment of warmth. The broth is saltless, but the smoke from the fire has imparted a flavor you tell yourself is depth. You chew on a piece of cabbage that dissolves into threads. Then you find something chewy, tough, possibly cartilage. You swallow it anyway. Hunger is a great negotiator. Mainstream historical fact. Dinner for medieval peasants was usually the largest meal of the day, eaten after work in the late afternoon or early evening. Like breakfast and lunch, it typically featured pottage or stew made from whatever vegetables were in season, thickened with grains or bread, and occasionally flavored with scraps of meat or fish. Spices were expensive and generally reserved for the wealthy. Salt was used sparingly. Meals were cooked in a single pot suspended over the hearth, often reused from one day to the next. Stew pots were kept simmering for days with new ingredients added to stretch the food further. You chew carefully now, your teeth still sore from earlier. The bread on the side is dry and dense, a chunk you have to soak before it yields. You dip it into the stew and bite. It crumbles slowly, gluey in your mouth, and sticks to the roof like regret. Someone coughs nearby, then blows their nose directly into the fire. You lose your appetite momentarily, then remember there's nothing else to eat. You keep going. Across the room, a toddler cries. He's too young to understand the world he's in, but old enough to be hungry and cold. His mother shushes him softly, bouncing him on her hip while stirring another pot. You watch the scene, mesmerized by the quiet efficiency. No panic, no exasperation, just endurance. A neighbor arrives unannounced, hands blue from the cold. He offers a jar of preserved turnips in exchange for a slice of yesterday's bread. The trade happens without ceremony. No one questions it. Barter is the blood of village life. Coins are scarce. Trust is everything. A quirky historical tidbit. In some regions, especially in Northern Europe, households practice potluck eating where neighbors would contribute ingredients to a communal stew. This early form of community dining wasn't driven by charity but necessity. Shared resources meant shared survival. It also meant that if someone contributed a rare treat like bacon or dried mushrooms, it elevated everyone's meal. There were even unspoken rules about not skimming too much meat from the top. You wonder what meat would taste like now, real meat roasted or seared, or at least not boiled into strings. But for most peasants, meat was a luxury, not a staple. Chickens were more valuable for their eggs. Pigs had to be fattened for months, and cows were rarely slaughtered unless old or injured. You might see meat once a week, maybe less. You scrape the bottom of your bowl and feel a small bone click against your spoon. You pick it up, inspect it, and set it aside. Even you have limits. The fire crackles softly. Smoke curls upward into the thatch, darkening the ceiling beams. The room grows dim. There are no electric lights, only the flicker of flame and the occasional rush of wind outside. You pull your shawl tighter, sitting close to the hearth, letting the warmth sink into your legs. The ache in your arms fades to a dull throb. Your mind drifts. Historians still argue whether peasants were chronically malnourished or simply underfed by modern standards. Some skeletal remains show signs of stunted growth anemia and vitamin deficiency. Others suggest a surprisingly robust build, especially among adult males, pointing to seasonal variation in diet and hard physical labor as factors. The truth likely depends on location season and the success of the year's harvest. A bad harvest meant less food. Less food meant illness. Illness meant death. You look around the room again. Your family, or whoever this medieval version of your family is settling in. A boy sharpens a small blade with a whetstone. An older woman spins wool by the fire. Someone mutters a prayer in Latin, mispronounced but earnest. There's no conversation, just the rhythmic quiet of people finishing their food, licking their fingers, wiping their mouths on sleeves already stained with earth. You stand, stretch, and place your bowl near the hearth. It will be rinsed with ash and hot water later, maybe. Dishes are rarely washed in the modern sense. Cleanliness is relative. Efficiency is sacred. There's no dessert, no tea, no entertainment. Supper ends when the pot runs dry and the bowls are empty. You glance out the door, catching a glimpse of the stars. The wind whistles across the rooftops, whispering secrets only old stones can keep. You sit again, arms around your knees, chin resting on your forearms. Your stomach is quieter now, not full exactly, but distracted. You wonder what the stew contained. You wonder how long it will last. You wonder what tomorrow's version will taste like if you're still here. Then you close your eyes and breathe deeply the scent of wood smoke and sweat wrapping around you like a blanket. Your head is heavy. The ache has spread to your ribs, but there is still the satisfaction of survival. You ate. You endured. And somewhere in the corner of this rough, dim room, you feel it. The day is almost over, but sleep is just another trial. Night in the medieval village doesn't fall gently, it drops like a curtain, sudden and absolute. The last light of the sun slips away behind the thatched rooftops, and with it goes any illusion of comfort. There's no electricity, no lamp switch to flick, just the fire sputtering in its hearth, and the flicker of a single tallow candle, casting long, jumpy shadows across the walls. And now it's time to do the one thing that might seem like a reward after a brutal day's sleep. But you're not crawling into clean cotton sheets, not even onto a creaky wooden mattress with a threadbare quilt. You're returning to the same mound of bug-infested straw you woke up in. It's been turned, maybe kicked back into shape during the day, but it hasn't improved. There's a chill in the air now, the kind that creeps under clothing and wraps around your bones. The blanket you pull over yourself is wool coarse, scratchy and heavy from months of grime. And it still smells like something that once lived. You lie down, curling your knees toward your chest to preserve heat. It helps barely. Your shoulder presses into the packed earth floor, and your hip finds an old rock no one thought to move. There's no pillow. You bunch a rolled-up cloak under your neck and immediately regret it. It's damp, sour-smelling, and offers no real support. Comfort is a fantasy here. Warmth is a negotiation. You're not alone in this bed, not even close. 2 younger siblings or cousins it's hard to keep track are curled at your side. One kicks in his sleep, the other snores softly, face buried in a patch of straw. Across the room, your parents sleep on a similar pile, the baby nestled between them. A grandmother lies near the hearth, her eyes closed, mouth slightly open. And somewhere in the dark, a chicken shuffles and coos, pecking once at something invisible, before settling under a bench. In this world, personal space is a myth. Entire families sleep in the same room, often on the same sleeping platform or mat. There's no such thing as my side of the bed. You sleep wherever there's room. Richer households might own a bed frame and a feather mattress, but here for a peasant family the floor is your bed, and a shared one at that. Mainstream historical sources describe medieval peasant homes as one-room dwellings, often housing extended families alongside livestock. Beds were rudimentary wooden frames, rope supports and straw mattresses stuffed with hay or dried heather. Blankets were often shared, and children frequently slept in the same bed as adults for warmth. There was no expectation of privacy. In fact, the concept of individual sleeping arrangements wouldn't become common for the lower classes until centuries later. You shift onto your side, trying to relieve pressure from your shoulder. The movement jostles the child next to you, who lets out a groan and rolls against your ribs. You sigh. The room smells of smoke, sweat, and animals. It's stifling but cold. You close your eyes. And then the noises begin. It starts with creaking, not of the house, though the rafters groan in the wind, but from bodies adjusting on straw. Then someone coughs a deep, wet sound that rattles. A moment later, another person stirs, sniffles, groans, and falls silent. The baby wakes and lets out a high, piercing wail. You flinch. The mother murmurs, rolls over, and offers what might be milk, or perhaps a knuckle to suck on. The crying stops, replaced by the rhythmic crackle of the fire. Then the chicken clucks. Then a mouse scurries across the rafters. Then someone farts. Loudly. A small giggle erupts from the other side of the room, quickly hushed. You pull the blanket over your ears. It doesn't help. A quirky historical tidbit. Many peasants shared sleeping quarters, not just with family members, but also with hired laborers' servants or even travelers passing through. Inns were expensive, and hospitality norms sometimes dictated that strangers be offered shelter. This meant that you might fall asleep next to a cousin, a neighbor, a goat, or a complete stranger with lice. And yes, lice were a regular accepted part of life. There are records of people combing them out and burning them in candles for amusement. You itch, whether from straw sweat or tiny creatures you don't know. You scratch your ankle, then your neck, then your side. It doesn't help. You scratch again. Someone beside you stirs. You stop. Time passes slowly. The fire dies down to embers glowing faintly in the darkness. The air turns colder. You pull the blanket tighter. Your feet are numb. Your hip aches. Your stomach, though technically fed, twists with residual hunger. You lie still, listening. Someone is talking in their sleep, muttering nonsense in a low, tense voice. It continues for a minute, then stops. A dog barks in the distance. A door slams somewhere in the village. The wind rises and falls. You can't sleep. You're too aware. Historians still debate the medieval sleep cycle. Some evidence suggests people slept in two phases: first sleep and second sleep, with a waking period in between. During this time, they might pray, talk quietly, or even do chores. This segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep, is believed to have been a natural response to pre-industrial darkness and lack of artificial light. It's not insomnia. It's just how bodies behaved in a world ruled by natural cycles. You wonder if this is your first sleep, or if you've somehow skipped straight to the in-between. Your brain buzzes with everything you've endured: the cold, the labor, the blistered hands, the stew, the cut on your arm. Your body screams for rest, but your mind won't let go. You shift again. A straw pricks your ear. You yank it out and reposition your head. Your neck cramps. Someone snores. The chicken rustles. You miss silence, but even silence here isn't true silence. It's filled with breath creaks, heartbeats, the rustle of wool, the crack of joints. You think about the mattresses back home, foam cotton softness you once took for granted. You miss being clean. You miss solitude. You miss breathing air that doesn't smell like the inside of a boot. You glance toward the wall where a sliver of moonlight spills through a crack in the wood. Dust floats in the beam. You watch it dance hypnotic, and finally your muscles begin to loosen. Your mind drifts. You stop scratching. The ache dulls. Sleep comes. Not gently, not fully, but in pieces, patchy, shallow, flickering like the last ember in the hearth. It is not rest. It is surrender. And in this world, that's the closest you'll get. The morning you just survived doesn't fade away, it transforms. Time slows, but the light begins to shift. And with it, so does the story. Not all medieval lives were defined by mud labor and silence. Some unfolded behind convent walls, where the work was quieter but no less profound. You wake again, but not as a peasant this time. You are still in the medieval world, still bound by its rules and fears. But now you find yourself surrounded by stone corridors, echoing footsteps and the soft rustle of parchment, and you meet her, Hildegard of Bingen. You've likely never slept next to someone like her. In fact, few did. Hildegard lived in the 12th century, born to noble parents in what is now modern-day Germany. She was the 10th child in a wealthy family, and in keeping with the custom of the time, she was dedicated to the church, as a tithe, a spiritual offering. At the age of 8, she was sent to live under the care of an anchoress named Jutta, eventually taking vows and entering a Benedictine monastery. But Hildegard was no ordinary nun. She began experiencing visions as a child, vivid, startling, and accompanied by a kind of inner clarity that she couldn't explain. These weren't fleeting daydreams. They were detailed theological revelations, filled with cosmic imagery and strange symmetries. And for decades she kept them secret. The world of the 12th century was not kind to women who claimed divine insight, but eventually she began to speak tentatively at first, and then with rising confidence. You find yourself walking beside her through the cloister gardens. The air smells of crushed herbs and damp earth. She names each plant as she passes it: wormwood, dill, vervain. Her knowledge is encyclopedic, drawn from both classical texts and lived experience. She doesn't just believe in medicine, she practices it. For Hildegard, health isn't just physical. It's a balance of body, soul, and nature. She wrote treatises on healing, cataloged the medicinal properties of plants, and understood the rhythms of illness, like she understood the tones of music. Because yes, Hildegard was also a composer, a mainstream historical fact. Hildegard of Bingen is considered one of the first identifiable composers in Western history. Her music, monophonic soaring celestial, was unlike anything her contemporaries were writing. Her compositions were not merely hymns. They were intricate meditations, often paired with her theological writings and visions. Her most famous musical collection, Symphonia Harmonia Celestium, Revelationum, Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations, remains widely studied and performed today. You step into a vaulted chapel. The stone walls resonate with sound. Hildegard stands at the lectern, her voice ringing out clear, commanding, layered with both strength and awe. Other nuns join her, their voices rising and falling like waves. You feel something shift in your chest. The music reaches somewhere deeper than words. In a world ruled by superstition, illness, and male authority, this moment is luminous. But Hildegard wasn't simply a healer or a musician. She was a writer, a theologian, and in many ways a revolutionary. She corresponded with popes and emperors, unafraid to rebuke them when she believed they had strayed from divine will. She wrote letters filled with stern warnings, moral clarity, and always the conviction that her voice was not her own, but God's. And people listened. A quirky historical tidbit. In 1148, Hildegard claimed that God had commanded her to leave her monastery and found her own. She met resistance, especially from male superiors, who didn't want to lose her. So she stopped eating. She fell ill, and she claimed that her sickness was divine punishment for disobeying God's call. Only after this spiritual standoff was she granted permission to establish her own convent at Rupertsberg, where she led her nuns with strict discipline, artistic fervor, and intellectual brilliance. You walk with her along the cloister's edge. She speaks of visions, wheels of fire, towers of light, spiraling forces of nature and grace. She speaks of music that comes in dreams of herbs, that whisper their uses of bodies that can be healed if the soul is listened to properly. And through it all, her eyes never stop searching. Skyward, inward, outward, always asking, always translating something greater than the world can explain. Historians still argue whether Hildegard's visions were divine revelations, migraines, or symptoms of a neurological condition. Some believe she may have suffered from scotoma visual disturbances caused by migraines. Others argue that her imagery was rooted in biblical allegory and deep meditation. What remains beyond debate is her impact a woman in a patriarchal world who became a spiritual authority, a medical practitioner, a composer, and an author whose writings would span centuries. You follow her into the scriptorium. The room smells of ink and vellum. Other nuns sit with quills in hand, copying texts illuminating letters with gold and red. Hildegard stands at the center, dictating her latest work to a younger scribe. Her Latin is precise, her cadence steady. She quotes scripture, then veers into mystical commentary, painting ideas as if they were visions on the page. It's quiet here, but the quiet hums with purpose. Everything matters. Every line written, every herb hung to dry, every note sung. You're struck by the depth of this life, a life of contemplation, but not isolation. A life of discipline, but not silence. A life that defied the expectations of gender authority and orthodoxy. You return to your straw bed that night. Not the one you slept in before, but one inside stone walls with a roof that doesn't leak, and air that smells of lavender and wood smoke. You still share your space, but now it's with women who read by candlelight, who rise at midnight to chant, who believe that the body is not just clay, but an instrument capable of healing, singing, creating. You close your eyes. The pain of your hands, the ache of your back, the memory of the field, all of it fades under the spell of what you've just witnessed. One woman, one voice, one life that echoed beyond its century. And you realize not everyone in the medieval world was forgotten. Some were remembered not because they ruled, but because they revealed. The candlelight fades, but you don't return to darkness. Instead, your mind drifts further inward, past the cloisters and the fields, into a stranger, more playful corner of medieval life. You find yourself seated at a long wooden bench, not in a chapel or a manor, but in a dim scriptorium, lit only by narrow windows and flickering torches. All around you, monks are bent over manuscripts, their quills scratching steadily across parchment. And it's here, nestled between sacred psalms and saintly laments, that you discover something utterly unexpected. A rabbit riding a dog, wearing a horned helmet, and wielding a lance. You blink. It doesn't go away. You lean closer. On the bottom edge of the parchment, just beneath a solemn passage about divine judgment, the margins come alive, tiny hand-painted creatures, frolic in chaotic glee. A monkey playing bagpipes, a nun chasing a bishop with a stick, a snail in armor dueling a knight. The scene is absurd, whimsical, and oddly meticulous. You're looking at what historians now call marginalia, and it's some of the most quietly rebellious, delightfully weird art ever made. Mainstream historical fact: marginalia. The illustrations that adorn the edges of illuminated manuscripts were a common feature of medieval book production, especially from the 12th to the 15th centuries. While the central texts of these books were religious or scholarly in nature, the margins were often filled with playful, surreal, or grotesque images. Scholars have debated their purpose for centuries. Were they jokes, visual commentary, coded messages? Possibly all three. You sit beside one of the monks who doesn't notice you. His hands are steady face, lit by a small oil lamp, and his eyes dart between the Latin lines he copies, and the fantastic creature he's sketching just below. He is a man of God. But he's drawing a fox pretending to be a priest, hearing confession from a goose. The ink is still wet on the fox's cassock. This, you realize, is a kind of medieval mischief. In a world dominated by hierarchy, piety, and fear of sin, the margins became a space for freedom, for satire, for the strange. It wasn't rebellion in the streets, it was rebellion in the footnotes. And the people who did it, scribes, monks, artists with aching backs and sore fingers, and a need to play even just a little. As you leaf through more manuscripts, the pattern becomes clearer. There's structure in the chaos. Some drawings mocked the nobility men with donkey ears, lords with oversized bellies and idiotic expressions. Others parody religious life bishops being chased by rabbits, demons hiding in chalices, angels playing dice. And then there are the animals. Oh, the animals fighting, flirting, jousting, praying. Creatures dressed as humans. Humans with animal heads and a recurring obsession with giant snails. A quirky historical tidbit. The armored snail appears so frequently in medieval marginalia that scholars have proposed dozens of theories to explain it. Some believe it represented cowardice. Others think it was a stand-in for the resurrection of the soul. Snails emerged from their shells after all. One popular theory suggests the snails symbolized the Lombards, a group unpopular with the Franks depicted as slow armored foes. But the truth no one really knows. It might have just been funny. And that's what makes it magic. You begin to see the marginalia as a mirror, a quiet reflection of the minds behind the manuscripts. These weren't mindless copiers. They were thinkers, observers, people who spent years of their lives bending over sacred texts and who needed now and then to laugh, or to imagine, or to smuggle a little absurdity into eternity. Not all marginalia were jokes, of course. Some served as commentary or elaboration on the text. Others were mnemonic devices aiding memory through visual cues. A knight beside a psalm about courage. A bird near a passage on grace. But the strangest ones, the rabbits fighting knights. The bottoms exposed mid-dance, the dragons biting their own tails. Those were not explanations. They were invitations to question, to wonder, to smile. Historians still argue whether marginalia was approved or slipped in quietly. Some abbots may have tolerated or even encouraged artistic freedom, especially in large, wealthy scriptoria. Others likely imposed strict rules. There are cases of pages being scraped clean and redone, suggesting censorship. But the persistence of strange imagery across countries' centuries and scriptural texts suggests that these margins were more than just spaces. They were loopholes in the medieval order. You turn another page. A bear plays the lute, while a cat dances in a tunic. Further along, a fish with legs prays at a tiny altar, and at the very edge, in a space barely large enough for a thumbprint, a face peeks out winking, as if the artist knew you'd be looking centuries later. The artistry is remarkable. The colors drawn from crushed minerals and rare plants still glow under the dim light. Gold leaf shimmers beside ink strokes so fine they look like hair. You imagine the hours it took to finish one image. Days, maybe weeks. All to decorate a page that would rarely be seen. But maybe that was the point. Marginalia wasn't meant for everyone. It was a secret handshake, a smirk, a whisper across time. And then you find a page that stops you. A nun and a monk, kissing, their robes half falling, their hands entangled. Around them, animals watch, bemused. It's shockingly tender, even cheeky. You feel yourself blush as though intruding. But this, too, was part of medieval life. Not everything was fire and piety. Desire existed. So did curiosity. So did humor, irreverence, irony. You realize then that the margins of history are where the humanity lives. Not in the center columns of triumph and tragedy. Not always in the clean, edited lines of kings and popes. But here in the weirdness, the whisper, the scribbled joke in the corner, You rise from the desk and step back, taking in the full-page text in neat columns, framed by dragons, fools, beasts, and dancers. The serious and the silly, the divine and the ridiculous, all sharing space, all coexisting in one manuscript, one life. And in that moment you understand something important. The people who lived in this age weren't just suffering, praying, or obeying. They were also imagining, laughing, sketching snails in armor and rabbits with swords, because the world is always a little bit absurd no matter how serious the stakes. You return now not to a field, not to a convent, but to your own breath, your own quiet, your own margins. And somewhere inside you the image of that rabbit on a dog sticks with you, tiny, perfect, defiant. Because even in the darkest chapters there's room for joy in the margins. You hear it first, the quick, rhythmic breath of labor, not your own, but near. Pressed in a wooden hut warmed by firelight, you kneel beside a woman whose forehead glistens with sweat and resolve. She grips the edge of a low straw mattress. Her teeth clenched, her body curled inward around a pain older than time. She is about to bring a life into the world, and she is not alone. Beside her, a midwife steadies her with a hand on her spine, and a whisper that cuts through the moan of agony like silk through cloth. Breathe, child. You've done harder things. The midwife does not wear robes or carry tools of shining steel. Her fingers are scrubbed raw, her apron speckled with lavender oil and old stains. There are no hospital lights, no epidurals, no fetal monitors. Only touch-breath voice. Only the memory of births past, and the knowing of when to wait and when to act. In medieval Europe, she is one of the most important and most unsung figures in the entire village. She is the midwife. Mainstream historical fact. Midwives were the primary caregivers for women in childbirth throughout the medieval period. Their knowledge was practical, passed from woman to woman, and deeply rooted in both folk tradition and hands-on experience. Often older women midwives were respected, and sometimes feared figures, who straddled the lines between healer priestess and village elder. The earliest formal midwifery regulations appeared in the late 13th century, often dictated by the Church, which insisted that midwives must be able to baptize a newborn if the child seemed unlikely to survive. You sit quietly invisible, but present as the midwife prepares for the next contraction. The room smells of sweat, wood smoke, and herbs mugwort, for the pain rosemary for purification. A pot of boiling water simmers over the fire, not for sterilizing tools, there are none, but for warming cloths and easing tense muscles. The woman cries out again, and the midwife leans in, murmuring praise and prayer in the same breath. She knows the signs, the slow crowning of the head, the position of the pelvis, the color of the mother's lips. She reads the body like scripture, not with detached professionalism, but with the intimacy of someone who has seen this threshold crossed 100 times and knows how close death can be. Because childbirth in this world is dangerous. If you are poor, and most are you give birth at home, surrounded by women your mother, if she still lives your sisters, if they can be spared from the fields. No doctor will come. No man is likely to enter this sacred space. If you bleed too much, or the baby's head sticks, or the cord wraps wrong, there is only the midwife's instinct and the mercy of God. Still many do survive, because of women like this. She uses no written chart. Her records are in her memory in the shape of hips. She's helped widen the sounds of distress. She's soothed the infants. She's slapped to breath with her own trembling hands. Some she's lost. You can see it in the quiet pause between pushes, in the way her eyes shift, not with panic but calculation. When the baby finally arrives, slippery and silent, she moves quickly, rubbing its back, whispering something soft. A weak cry bubbles up, and the air in the room loosens. The mother sobs, half in pain, half in relief. The midwife wraps the child in rough linen and lifts it with a reverence that borders on holy. Then she checks the mother presses the belly murmurs, applies a poultice made of boiled chamomile and crushed myrrh. You realize you're witnessing not just birth, but a sacred rite, a mystery performed with no altar, but a straw mattress, and no priest, but a woman who's seen too much and still believes in the miracle of a cry. A quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval England and France, midwives would sometimes bite down on iron keys or place scissors beneath the bed during labor, believing it would cut the pain or unlock a stuck birth. These rituals, part folklore, part comfort, coexisted with herbal remedies and Christian prayer-blending pagan traditions with church doctrine in a seamless braid of superstition and hope. And hope, you begin to see, is one of the midwife's most potent tools. She speaks little as she works, but every motion is intentional. She unties knots in the bedposts. Some believe knots must be undone during labor to allow the body to open. She opens the shutters slightly, letting in air. She places a tiny sprig of yarrow in the baby's wrap, muttering a verse about protection from cold breath and the evil eye. Historians still argue whether medieval midwives were medical practitioners or folk magicians. Some claim they were marginalized, allowed to operate only in the absence of physicians always suspect in the eyes of the church. Others argue they were respected, often wealthy women of experience, who wielded considerable influence in their communities. The truth likely lies in the same place the midwife stands between shadow and light, between healing and heresy. As the newborn nuzzles against its mother, the midwife begins to clean up. There are no rubber gloves, no plastic bags, just careful folding, burning of soiled cloth and quiet orders to fetch clean water. She's already thinking of the next call, maybe across the village where another woman lies doubled in pain, or maybe a stillbirth, or a breach. She does not fear these things, but she carries their weight in her shoulders. You think back to how many births you've heard of in history classes, royal heirs, noble mothers, saints. But here in this room of earth and straw is the real heart of civilization, not the throne room, not the battlefield, but the woman who sits between life and death, coaxing one toward light with a palm on a slick forehead and a voice that doesn't tremble. Because she must not tremble. Some were formally trained. In urban centers like Paris and Milan, guilds of midwives eventually formed regulating practice and requiring licenses. But for most of medieval Europe, a midwife's education came from apprenticeship and observation. She learned not from books, but from blood and sweat, and sometimes tears. You might wonder how these women were seen. Revered, feared both. In times of trouble, they were sometimes scapegoated, accused of witchcraft when births went wrong or when male physicians wanted their territory back. Some were even tried by the Inquisition. But in the eyes of the mothers, the women who screamed and pushed and prayed, they were angels. Midwives weren't just women who delivered babies. They were gatekeepers between realms, and they carried a wisdom few dared to name. It's nearly dawn now. The midwife wraps a scarf around her shoulders, thanks the family, and walks out into the frost, her breath silver in the air. You follow her steps, watching, as she returns to her own small hut, bare but neat. She has no family of her own, or none still living, but her walls are lined with tiny talismans, a baby sock, a dried herb bundle, a carved charm of St. Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. She sits finally and removes her shoes. Her feet are calloused, her ankles swollen. She does not speak, but her silence is not emptiness. It is earned. You wonder if she ever thinks of all the lives she's helped begin, the tiny chests that rose and fell because of her, the mothers who lived instead of bled. Maybe she doesn't let herself wonder. Maybe she just carries on waiting for the next knock at her door. And when it comes, she'll rise again, tired, yes, but steady. Always steady. Because in the Middle Ages, amid plague and famine and fire, the midwife was the one who reminded the world that life still begins in warmth and blood and breath. Not in the high towers, but in the low beds. You step back into your own breath, now the vision fading, but not the feeling. The reverence lingers, the hush of candlelight, the whisper of a heartbeat barely born. You may never know her name, but someone somewhere does, because we all come from someone like her. You're back beneath a vaulted ceiling, but it's no drafty peasant hovel or candlelit scriptorium. This time the air is different, rich with incense and silk sharp with the scent of travel. You're standing in a court, and not just any court. This is the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, and everything about it feels sharper, faster, and more alive than what you've come to expect of the medieval world. She enters without a trumpet, yet everyone turns. Not because they fear her, but because she moves like someone who knows exactly what she wants. Born in 1122 in one of the wealthiest and most culturally vibrant regions of France, Eleanor was no ordinary noble girl. By the time she was 15, she inherited the Duchy of Aquitaine, a territory so large and politically valuable that it made her the most eligible woman in Europe. But Eleanor wasn't just a duchess. She was a storm wrapped in velvet, and the world was not ready. Mainstream historical fact. Eleanor of Aquitaine was queen to two kings, Louis VII of France, and later Henry II of England, and mother to two more, including Richard the Lionheart and King John. She participated in the Second Crusade, managed vast territories, and patronized poets, philosophers, and reformers. Her life shaped the course of 12th century European politics, more than most men of her time. Your feet shift across polished stone as she strides past robes trailing crowns slightly askew like she couldn't be bothered to adjust it. She married Louis of France at just 15, and quickly learned that being queen wasn't all feasts and roses. Louis was pious, bookish, and earnest. Eleanor, by contrast, preferred hawking poetry and politics. She joined him on the Second Crusade, one of the few queens to ever do so, riding side by side with soldiers and commanding troops across Byzantine and Muslim territories. But things didn't go well in the Holy Land. The crusade faltered. Rumors bloomed of an affair with her uncle Raymond of Antioch, of dissatisfaction of boldness that frightened the timid French court. When she and Louis returned to Europe, their marriage unraveled. After 15 years, 2 daughters, and a continent's worth of scandal, they divorced. A quirky historical tidbit. When Eleanor sought to annul her marriage to Louis, the official reason cited was consanguinity, being too closely related by blood. This wasn't unusual. Medieval nobility were frequently cousins. But the real reason Eleanor and Louis were completely mismatched. He wanted a nun. She was a force of nature. The church granted the annulment, after Eleanor had spent years maneuvering for it. Now single and powerful again, Eleanor wasted no time. Within weeks she married Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry II of England, 11 years her junior, and no less ambitious. If her marriage to Louis had been a mismatch, this one was dynamite. Together they ruled an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But 2 fires rarely sit quietly in the same hearth. You watch as Eleanor's court pulses with poetry and politics. This isn't a passive queen draped in gold. This is a woman who funds troubadours, intervenes in law, governs duchies, and raises kings. She doesn't ask for permission. She sends instructions. Her court at Poitiers becomes legendary for its culture, a sanctuary for the arts in a brutal world. Here the rules of courtly love are debated. Songs are sung in Occitan, and women are not just muses. They're judges, patrons, leaders. But trouble brews. Henry, now King of England, is brilliant but volatile. Their marriage begins to sour. Eleanor gives birth to 8 children, among them the famed Richard the Lionheart, and the less adored but politically dangerous John. As the years pass, Eleanor grows weary of Henry's affairs, especially his favoritism toward his mistress Rosamond Clifford, and his political heavy-handedness. So she does something that, once again, no one expects. She backs a rebellion against him. It's 1173. Her sons rise up against their father, tired of his iron grip. And Eleanor, she supports them. She's captured on her way to join them in France, and is imprisoned for the next 16 years. 16 years. Think about that. Locked away in various castles, kept from court, kept from power. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's role in the rebellion was direct or symbolic. Did she mastermind the uprising, or was she simply its most famous supporter? Whatever the case, Henry never let her fully return to power during his lifetime. He underestimated her resolve. When Henry dies in 1189, everything changes. Richard ascends the throne, and one of his first acts, he frees his mother. And just like that, Eleanor of Aquitaine re-enters the world now in her late 60s, but as sharp as ever. She becomes one of Richard's chief advisors, travels across Europe to secure alliances, and even helps negotiate his ransom when he's captured during the Crusades. At an age when most medieval women were long buried or cloistered, Eleanor is still forging treaties, managing estates, and influencing kings. You sit near her now as she dictates a letter. Her voice is firm, calm. The room quiets. She's issuing orders about a marriage treaty, but you hear more than politics. You hear a lifetime of navigating thrones, wars, betrayals, and births. Eleanor is no longer the scandalous duchess or the crusading queen. She is something rarer, a woman whose power survived. Marriage survived motherhood, survived even the grave expectations of her gender. She dies at 82, having outlived 2 kings, 8 children, and 100 myths about what women could be. She is buried beside Henry, the man who imprisoned her in the Abbey of Fontevraud. But you can't help thinking she would have chosen a different neighbor. You walk past tapestries woven with lions and fleur-de-lis. You pass statues of kings and bishops who owe part of their legacy to her bloodline or defiance. And finally you arrive at a quiet alcove, where young women are reciting verses, one in Latin, one in Occitan. They don't know you're there, but they're reading lines from a troubadour. Eleanor once patronized a poet who described her not as passive or pious, but as luminous and dangerous a flame the wind cannot kill. And in that moment you realize that for all the noise of war and throne rooms, Eleanor's true legacy might be here in the spark she lit, in the queens who came after, in the scholars, in the writers, in the ones who stopped asking for permission. She didn't rewrite every law. She didn't end patriarchy, but she cracked the script wide open, and you centuries later are still turning her pages. You hear her before you see her, a soft voice but firm, unwavering. It cuts through incense and ritual like a candle slicing darkness. You're standing in 14th century Siena, and the figure speaking isn't a priest or a noble or a man. It's a young woman draped in plain cloth with uncombed hair, sunken cheeks and eyes that seem to see too much. This is Catherine. Not yet a saint, not yet a symbol, just a girl who talks to God and expects popes and kings to listen. Catherine of Siena was born in 1347, the 23rd child in a wool dyer's household. You heard that right. 23 children. Her twin sister died young, as many children did. Catherine herself nearly didn't survive childhood. The Black Death swept through Europe the year she was born, killing entire villages. But she lived, and from a young age she began claiming visions, Jesus, Mary, angels, whispering not sweet lullabies but urgent warnings. Mainstream historical fact. Catherine of Siena became one of the most influential religious figures of the Middle Ages. Though never formally educated, she dictated letters and treatises that shaped European politics, negotiated peace during papal schisms, and was later named a Doctor of the Church, one of only 4 women to hold the title in Catholic history. You sit in the back of the stone chapel, where she prays watching as she rocks gently her fingers, twitching in rhythm with her whispered words. She's no cloistered nun. She joined the Dominican Third Order, living at home but embracing vows of poverty and chastity. While other girls learned needlework, Catherine fasted scrubbed floors in plague hospitals and debated priests. By the time she was 20, she had a growing following people who believed her visions weren't hallucinations, but divine guidance. A quirky historical tidbit. Catherine often fasted so strictly that she survived on the Eucharist alone, for days at a time. Her confessor tried to intervene, but she dismissed concerns. Food, she said, was a distraction. Her appetite was reserved for heaven. Modern scholars have debated whether her self-starvation was spiritual devotion illness, or something in between. But in her time it was seen as a kind of holy hunger. She walks barefoot across marble addressing bishops as equals. Her letters, over 400 of them, were sent to every corner of Europe. She called cardinals dear Babbo Italian for daddy, and told popes they were acting cowardly. Yes, cowardly. Specifically, she urged Pope Gregory V to leave Avignon in France and return the papacy to Rome where it belonged. This wasn't just a theological plea, it was political. The church had been seen as weak and compromised, and Catherine believed God demanded its restoration. Historians still argue whether Catherine's influence was the decisive push that ended the Avignon papacy. Was the Pope already planning to return to Rome? Or did her fiery letters and personal visit tip the scale? Regardless, the fact that she, a laywoman with no official authority, was even in the conversation is astounding. You follow her as she journeys to Avignon. The streets are dusty and long. Catherine travels with a few companions and an iron will. When she reaches the papal court, she doesn't ask for an audience, she commands it. And when she meets Pope Gregory, she looks him in the eye and says, "Be a man." Yes, those were her actual words. She urged him to fulfill his duty, return to Rome, and reform the church. Soon after he did. But Catherine's influence didn't stop there. During the Western Schism, when rival popes were elected in Rome, and Avignon plunging Europe into confusion, Catherine took Rome's side. She believed that obedience to one rightful pope was essential, even if that pope didn't always listen to her advice. You lean against a stone column as Catherine returns to Siena. She's thinner now, her voice raspier, her letters more urgent. She's become both revered and reviled. Some believe she's a prophet. Others think she's dangerously unstable. But all agree she cannot be ignored. She continues to write calling on kings to end wars, urging cities to avoid rebellion, chastising clergy for corruption. Her dictations become theological works, filled with mystical imagery and moral clarity. The dialogue. Her most famous text is a conversation between her soul and God, a spiritual manual philosophical treatise and personal diary wrapped into one. You watch her kneel in a candlelit room. Her body trembles as she speaks, but her voice holds steady. She tells God she offers herself as a sacrifice for the sins of the world. Weeks later, she collapses. Her health, worn down by years of fasting and ceaseless work, declines rapidly. She dies in Rome in 1380. She is 33 years old. 33. And yet she had confronted popes, mended political rifts, and carved her name into the bedrock of church history. You hear her name whispered in cathedrals for centuries afterward. In 1461, she's canonized as a saint. In 1970, centuries later, she is named a doctor of the Church, a title granted only to those whose writings are considered essential to Catholic theology. As you step outside the chapel, the air tastes different, not sweeter, not easier, but charged, like something just shifted. Catherine wasn't trying to be famous. She wasn't born noble. She couldn't read or write in her early years. And yet she built a life not on power, but on persuasion, not on wealth, but on vision, and not on silence, but on speech, raw, relentless, inconvenient speech. She reminds you that the Middle Ages were not all mud and misery. In its shadowed corners, brilliance flickered. Sometimes it was wearing a gray tunic and no shoes. It's easy to imagine the Middle Ages as a gray smear of suffering. Between the famines, the wars, and the never-ending church bells tolling for the dead, you'd be forgiven for thinking no one had time to laugh, let alone write poetry. But tonight you are sitting by a flickering rushlight in a cramped village home, and someone is reciting a verse. It's not Latin, not lofty, just a simple rhyme about a go-to girl and the smell of wet bread. And somehow, despite everything, the room erupts with laughter. You're in the time of the Black Death. It's the mid-14th century, and plague has torn through the land like a wrathful wind. Entire towns have vanished. Clergy flee their parishes. People wear masks filled with flowers, thinking the scent will ward off death. And yet here is poetry. Here is song. Here is the human instinct to turn terror into something rhythmic and strangely beautiful. Mainstream historical fact. During the years 1347 to 1351, the Black Death killed an estimated 30% to 60% of Europe's population. In cities like Florence, London, and Paris, the death toll overwhelmed burial systems. And yet this devastation produced some of the most enduring works of medieval literature, including Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, a collection of stories told by young people escaping plague-ridden Florence. You hear those stories now. One tale is bawdy about a cunning friar and a jealous husband. Another is tender about a nobleman who forgives a thief. Boccaccio's genius was in showing the full range of humanity, even as the world was ending. His characters flirt, pray, lie, repent, and laugh. And they remind you life didn't stop being complex just because death was knocking louder. A quirky tidbit. One anonymous poem scratched into the margins of a monastery ledger simply reads, "I hope the rats eat the abbot's cheese." It's not profound. It's not holy, but it's real. Monks, nuns, and scribes weren't just copying Bibles. They were also whispering jokes to the parchment. You're in a tavern now. The ale is weak, the fire warm. Someone sings a ballad about a knight with no sword, who wins a battle by tripping over his own feet. The crowd hoots in approval. The verse isn't polished. It rhymes because it has to. But it travels mouth to mouth like a secret spell, passed from memory to memory until someone finally writes it down on a crinkled bit of vellum. Not all plague poetry is humorous, though. You wander into a candlelit church and find a different kind of verse carved into the stone, "I am dust, and so are you." It's called a memento mori, a reminder of death. These phrases were often painted or etched onto walls, doorways, or gravestones. They didn't shock people. They centered them. Historians still argue whether this explosion of poetry was a coping mechanism, a cultural shift, or simply a reflection of people who finally had time to write, because they were no longer working, because their towns were empty. What is clear, though, is that a wave of personal, emotional, and often anonymous expression swept across Europe in plague's shadow. Back in the countryside, a shepherd sits near his flock and hums a lullaby to no one in particular. His wife died last winter. His children are sick. But the melody comforts him. And you. He's kept it in his head for years, too shy to sing it aloud. But now, with the world so quiet, it spills out of him like water from a cracked jug. You sit with the scribe next. She's one of a few literate women in her region. In a tiny notebook hidden in a bundle of linens, she's been recording her thoughts. "The river still runs," she writes. "The moon still lifts. My hands are still my own." She doesn't call it poetry, but it is. Another girl, just 13, has taken to scratching riddles on bits of broken pottery. One reads, "What dies but cannot be buried?" The answer, a name. She's never read Aristotle, never heard of Homer. But her words, chipped and clumsy, are timeless. You peek into a noble's chamber. He's drunk, surrounded by books. Between gulps of wine, he recites lines in Provençal about a rose, a fox, and a woman, who turned him down twice. It's a love poem, but it drips with sarcasm. Apparently the rose had more thorns than petals. Even in death, poetry persists. In plague pits, people sometimes buried tokens, a charm, a carved rune, or a parchment, folded so small it looked like a seed. When opened centuries later, some of these scraps contained poems. Short, fragile, ink blurred by time, but still legible. One simply said, "I was here. I saw you smile. Remember me." Another reads, "If my bones shift, it's only from laughter." You chuckle, then feel a lump in your throat. That's the thing about plague poetry. It walks the line between grief and giggle, never quite settling on either side. You travel to Germany, where Meister Eckhart writes mystical sermons in verse. To England, where William Langland dreams of a sleeping peasant in a field. To Persia, where poets like Hafiz and Rumi pen lines that speak not of death, but of longing wine and divine joy. Plague didn't respect borders, and neither did the words people used to cope. In a monastery, a monk with shaking hands composes his final stanza. His brothers are gone. The bell hasn't rung in days. He dips his quill one last time and writes, "Let my silence be my psalm." Then he blows out the candle. The wind picks up. Leaves scatter across abandoned paths. But in one cottage a boy sits near a fire mumbling rhymes to his baby sister. She's too young to understand, but she smiles at the rhythm. And he keeps going. You realize now that poetry didn't survive the plague. It thrived in it. Because when the world stops making sense, humans don't stop speaking. They just start singing. The night has grown quiet now and the fire has burned low. You've journeyed through mud and sickness, shared beds with chickens, listened to mothers cry in childbirth, and watched poets laugh beside plague pits. You've seen the worst the medieval world had to offer: death without warning, injustice without recourse, and hunger that twisted your gut like a rope. And still here you are. You didn't survive 24 hours in medieval times, but someone did. They survived in wooden shoes and rag-stitched tunics with raw hands and missing teeth. They survived with their songs and riddles, their stubborn hearts, and their scratched verses. They survived long enough to raise children, bury neighbors, and pass down bread recipes and lullabies. They lit a candle every dusk and hoped it wouldn't be the last. And what did they build from that survival cathedrals of stone that still scrape the clouds? Manuscripts full of myth and medicine, words etched in ink and memory, traditions so stubborn they reached your doorstep today. They built Europe, not the one you see in postcards, but the quiet foundation beneath it all. Mainstream historical fact. Despite the brutality of medieval life, it laid the groundwork for modern institutions, universities, cities, legal systems, hospitals. Oxford and the Sorbonne began in the 12th and 13th centuries. Guilds trained craftsmen who would become the backbone of modern economies. Even democracy's seeds were being planted in the Magna Carta's parchment. And here's a quirky fact. Some medieval towns held cat trials, real court hearings for felines accused of witchcraft or theft. The cat, often terrified, would sit in the dock while humans debated its fate. It sounds absurd. But that's what survival sometimes looked like: humans, trying to explain the chaos with rituals, no matter how strange. Historians still argue whether the medieval world was truly as dark as we imagine. Some say it was just dim lit, not by ignorance, but by candlelight. Others argue it was a time of layered complexity, where superstition sat beside science, where brutality danced with beauty, where despair gave birth to innovation. Because not all darkness is empty. Sometimes it's a place where seeds grow. You walk through the ruins of a castle, now the stars overhead bright, with the kind of silence only the past can provide. There's no war here anymore, no plague, just moss creeping over stone and wind whispering through arrow slits. You place your hand on the wall. It's cold, but it's solid. Someone carved this. They hauled the stones, mixed the mortar, sang while they worked. This wasn't made by ghosts. It was made by hands like yours. And though they had nothing, they made something that lasted. You walk on, through a field where a healer once gathered herbs, past a village where a boy first kissed a girl, through a graveyard where headstones tilt toward heaven, like sleepy heads on pillows. The names have faded, but the stories didn't end. They just passed into the soil. You hear laughter now, soft. A woman telling a joke about a drunken goat. A child whispering a rhyme. A monk snoring while pretending to pray. Life threaded through time. There's a tapestry in your mind woven from every moment you've walked through. The lice and the lullabies. The rot and the resilience. The cruelty and the kindness. It's frayed at the edges, patched in places, but strong. So strong. And now let's slow down together. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the echoes fade, the clang of bells, the stomp of muddy boots, the scribble of ink in candlelight. Let them dissolve into the hush of the present. You're safe now, far from the 14th century. The straw bed is only a memory. The cold, the hunger, the aches, they've all faded with the dusk. But something lingers, doesn't it? Maybe it's the sound of that lullaby hummed by a mother with cracked hands. Maybe it's the flicker of a monk's lamp as he copied words he barely understood. Maybe it's the feel of a wooden spoon scraping the bottom of a pot that never had quite enough. What stays with you isn't the plague or the punishments, or even the mud between your toes. It's the people, the ones who didn't give up, who raised children in smoke-filled huts and told bedtime stories by firelight, who loved and mourned and laughed just like you. That's the truth beneath the history. It's not just a record of what hurt us. It's a record of how we kept going. So rest now. Let your breath slow like the turning of an old clock. Let the warmth of memory settle over you like a wool blanket that's been patched too many times to count. And if you dream tonight, may it be of flickering candles, ancient songs, and the quiet strength of those who made it through the dark. You wouldn't have lasted 24 hours in medieval times, but someone did. And because they did, you're here. Sleep well.